You think biltong is just beef jerky? You're wrong. It's a 400-year-old survival tool that fueled the Great Trek. And what about bobotie? South Africa's famous national dish wasn't born in Africa. It started in a 1609 Dutch cookbook. In this episode, we uncover why it is actually illegal to call a sausage Boerewors unless it obeys a strict government purity law, and how the Bunny Chow, a curry hidden inside a bread loaf, was invented as a genius loophole to feed segregated communities during Apartheid. From the pop politics of the gold mines that gave us chakalaka to the shipwreck legend of Mrs. Ball's chutney and the confusing war between the spicy Cuisisters and the crunchy Koeksisters, this is the history of a nation written in flavor. Why does Rooibos tea only grow on one specific mountain range? And did elephants really get drunk on Amarula? Stick around for the full, delicious truth. This is part 3. Let's start with the most famous South African smell, Boerewors. It literally translates to farmer's sausage, but here is the aha moment. You can't just grind up some meat and call it Boerewors. That is actually illegal. There is a specific government regulation that defines it. It must contain at least 90% meat and no pink slime. If you walk into a South African butcher and ask for Boerewors, you are asking for a product protected by law. The 1990 legislation is incredibly specific. It states that the sausage must contain beef, possibly mixed with pork or lamb, but the fat content cannot exceed 30%. It strictly forbids mechanically recovered meat, that gray paste you find in cheap hot dogs. If a butcher breaks these rules, he has to label it braai sausage. And in South Africa, serving braai sausage instead of Boerewors is practically a declaration of war. The flavor profile is non-negotiable. It's not just meat, it is a history lesson in a casing. The dominant spices, toasted coriander, cloves, and nutmeg, are a direct legacy of the Dutch East India Company. These were the spices the Dutch were hauling from the East Indies in the 1600s. The settlers at the Cape had access to the world's most expensive spices right off the boats, and they packed them into their food to preserve it. When you smell Boerewors cooking, you are smelling the trade winds of the 17th century. Speaking of preservation, have you ever heard of Biltong? Do not, I repeat, do not call it beef jerky. Jerky is cooked. Biltong is cured in vinegar and air-dried raw. It was the ultimate survival food for the Fort Trekkers during the Great Trek in the 1830s. They needed protein that wouldn't rot in an ox wagon under the African sun. The difference comes down to chemistry and climate. Jerky is usually smoked or dehydrated with heat. Biltong relies on the dry South African air and the curing power of vinegar and salt. The indigenous San and Khoikhoi people had been drying meat for thousands of years using salt and the wind. When the Dutch arrived, they added the vinegar from their wine supplies and saltpeter potassium nitrate to kill the deadly Clostridium botulinum bacteria. This fusion of indigenous knowledge and European chemistry created a superfood that could last for months without refrigeration. But the trekkers didn't just bring meat. They brought a pot, the potjie. It's a round, three-legged cast-iron cauldron, but it wasn't invented in Africa. It's actually a descendant of the Dutch ovens used during the Siege of Leiden in the 1500s. The settlers brought this siege pot to the Cape, and the three legs were perfect for balancing over an uneven wood fire. The Siege of Leiden in 1574 was a brutal war between the Dutch rebels and the Spanish Empire. People were starving. When the siege was finally lifted, The legend says the starving locals found a pot of stew left behind by the fleeing Spanish soldiers, a hotspot or hodgepodge of meats and vegetables. This concept of a slow-cooked, layered stew became the blueprint for survival cooking. When the fur trekkers moved inland, they needed a vessel that could take a beating. The round belly of the koye distributes heat evenly, acting like a pressure cooker. But the most important rule of potjie pot food, is almost religious. You never stir it. If you stir a poye, you ruin it. That's the rule. It cooks by steam for hours while you drink beer. It is slow food, invented by people who are always on the move. Now, let's move from the farms to the mines. This leads us to pap. It's a stiff maize porridge. But here's the twist. Maize isn't African. It's from Mexico. So why is it the staple? It's called pap politics. The colonial government pushed maize farming because it was a cheap, calorie-dense way to feed thousands of mine workers. Before the Portuguese arrived in the 1500s, the staple grains in South Africa were sorghum and millet. These are drought-resistant, nutritious ancient grains. But maize, corn, has a higher caloric yield per acre. When the diamond and gold rushes hit in the late 1800s, the mine bosses needed to feed hundreds of thousands of men in the hostels. They didn't care about nutrition, they cared about energy. Maize was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution in South Africa. This shift wasn't accidental, it was engineered. The Apartheid government subsidized white maize farmers, creating a monopoly that forced the indigenous population away from their traditional, varied diet and onto a monoculture of white starch. Today, pap and vleis, porridge and meat, is the beloved meal of the nation, but its dominance is a scar of industrial labor control. But pap on its own is bland. So, Mozambican miners invented a relish to wake it up. They took tinned baked beans, tomatoes, chilies, and curry powder, everything cheap at the mine store, and mixed it together. They called it chakalaka. Today, you cannot have a braai without it. It's the taste of the township. Chakalaka is the ultimate make-a-plan dish. It originated in the townships around Johannesburg. The miners, coming off long shifts, would pool their resources. One guy had a tin of beans, another had some arrots, another had curry powder. They threw it all together to create a spicy vegetable gravy that made the dry pap palatable. It's a dish born of poverty that became a national treasure. Now let's talk about the Gatsby. If you are in Cape Town, you don't eat a sandwich, you eat a weapon. The Gatsby is a massive submarine roll filled with slap chips, soft french fries, bologna, steak, egg, cheese, and spicy sauce. It is meant to be split 4 ways. The story of the Gatsby is legendary. In 1976, a fish shop owner named Rashad Pandy in Athlone, Cape Town, needed to feed some workers who had been helping him clear a plot of land. He had ran out of fish. So, he took a round loaf of bread, stuffed it with chips, polony and achar, pickles, whatever he had left, and handed it to them. One of the workers, a guy named Froggy, took a huge bite and shouted, "This is a Gatsby smash." Why Gatsby? The movie The Great Gatsby was playing in Cape Town cinemas at the time. To Froggy, anything that was amazing, excessive, and rich was a Gatsby. The name stuck. Rashad put it on the menu, and it became the staple food of the Cape Flats. It's cheap, it's huge, and it's delicious. Now the legend of Mrs. H.S. Ball's Chutney. The story goes that in 1852, a ship was wrecked off the coast. The captain survived, clutching one precious thing, a chutney recipe. While historians dispute the date, we know Mrs. Ball started selling it during World War I. The octagonal bottle, designed to pack tightly so they wouldn't break on the train. The shipwreck story is South Africa's favorite culinary myth. The ship was likely the SS Kwanzaa, and the year probably was 1872, not 1852. But the marketing genius was Amelia Ball. During the Great Depression and the World Wars, she turned a family recipe into an empire. The chutney is a perfect blend of peaches and apricots, fruits that thrive in the Cape, and spices like chili and coriander. It is the ketchup of South Africa. You put it on everything: cheese, meat, bobotie, eggs. But the real flavor of the Cape comes from the Cape Malay community. They gave South Africa its national dish, Bobotie. It's a curried ground meat bake with egg custard on top. But here's the kicker. The original recipe isn't African or Asian. It's from a 1609 Dutch cookbook. The Malay slaves took a boring European casserole and gave it a soul. The Dutch dish was called Bobotie. It was a way to use up Sunday's leftover roast meat on a Monday. They minced it up and baked it. But the Dutch food was bland. The Malay slaves who worked the kitchens introduced their ancestral knowledge of spices. They added turmeric, which gives the rice its famous yellow color, curry leaves, ginger, and lemon. They also added dried fruit, raisins, and sultanas, creating that unique sweet and savory profile that defines Cape cuisine. The egg custard on top, that's pure Dutch influence, designed to keep the meat moist. It is a true fusion dish, born 300 years before the word fusion existed. Warning, this is confusing. There's the Koeksister with a K, that's the Afrikaner version, braided, crunchy, and dipped ice cold into syrup. Then there is the Koesister, no K. That's the Cape Malay version, a spicy, soft dough rolled in coconut. If you visit Cape Town on a Sunday, you eat the soft one. Know the difference. The Koeksister, the crunchy one, is a feat of thermal shock engineering. You take boiling hot fried dough and plunge it immediately into ice-cold ginger syrup. The temperature shock sucks the syrup deep into the braid, making it a liquid sugar bomb. The Koesister, the soft one, is more like a spicy donut flavored with cardamom and cinnamon, reflecting the Asian heritage of the Cape Malay community. It is traditionally eaten on Sunday mornings for breakfast. Mixing them up is a rookie error. And finally, the most ingenious invention of apartheid, the Bunny Chow. It's a hollowed-out loaf of white bread filled with curry, no rabbit involved. During apartheid, black people were not allowed to enter restaurants, so owners used a cheap loaf of bread as a takeaway container. It's a dish born from segregation that became a national obsession. The origin of the name bunny is fascinating. It has nothing to do with rabbits. It comes from the word baniya. The baniyas were a caste of Indian merchants who operated the restaurants and shops in Durban. When black workers came to buy lunch, they would say they are going to the baniyas to get chow. Over time, baniya chow morphed into Bunny Chow. The mechanics of the Bunny Chow are brilliant. In the 1940s, styrofoam containers didn't exist. Rotis, flatbreads, were too flimsy to hold a heavy curry for a worker walking back to a job site. But a quarter loaf of government-subsidized white bread that was structurally sound. It was an edible bowl. You eat the virgin, the soft bread scooped out from the center first, dipping it into the gravy, and then you eat the walls of the bowl as the curry soaks through. It is messy, hot, and arguably the best street food on the planet. We can't finish without a drink. Rooibos tea. It grows in one place on Earth, the Cederberg Mountains. For centuries, nobody could farm it commercially because the seeds had hard shells. Enter a Russian tea merchant and a doctor who realized the seeds needed to be damaged. They developed scarification, grinding the seeds to mimic the damage caused by fire and ants. The story of Rooibos is a story of biopiracy and redemption. The indigenous San people knew about the tea for centuries. They knew that ants would collect the seeds and store them underground, where the acidity of the soil and the heat of bushfires would crack the hard shells, allowing them to germinate. In 1904, Benjamin Ginsberg, a Russian Jewish immigrant, realized he could market this mountain tea as an herbal substitute. But he couldn't farm it. He had to pay locals to climb the mountains and find wild plants. It wasn't until Dr. Lafrasse-Nortier discovered the secret of scarification, physically grinding the seeds to mimic the damage caused by fire and ants, that commercial farming became possible. Today, Rooibos is a geographic indicator product protected by international law like Champagne or Parmigiano Reggiano. And for dessert, Amarula, a cream liqueur made from the marula fruit, famous for the myth that elephants get drunk on it. It connects the ancient wildlife to the modern cocktail bar. South African food is a map of who arrived, who survived, and who they ate with. The drunk elephant myth is one of the most persistent viral stories in history. In the 1970s, a documentary called Animals Are Beautiful People showed elephants staggering around after eating fermented marula fruit. It was hilarious. It was also mostly staged. Scientists have since calculated that an elephant would have to eat about 1,400 fermented fruits to get even a mild buzz. They drink gallons of water, which dilutes the alcohol. But the story stuck, and it helped launch Amarula Cream in 1989. Making it the second best-selling cream liqueur in the world after Bailey's. And let's not forget the drink of the emperors, vin de Constantia. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the sweet wine from the Constantia Valley in Cape Town was the most famous wine in the world. More famous than Bordeaux, more famous than Burgundy. It was the favorite drink of Frederick the Great of Prussia. It was served to the King of England, but its most famous fan was Napoleon Bonaparte. When Napoleon was exiled to the island of St. Helena, a lonely rock in the middle of the Atlantic, he was miserable. The British gave him bad food and bad wine, but they allowed him one luxury. They shipped him gallons of vin de Constantia from the Cape. Legend has it that on his deathbed, Napoleon refused all food and water. He asked for only one thing: a glass of Constantia wine. It was the last thing to pass the lips of the man who conquered Europe, and it came from a vineyard in Cape Town. From shipwreck chutneys to sausage laws, from apartheid bread bowls to Russian tea marketers, South African food isn't just sustenance. It is a map of who arrived, who survived, and who they ate with. It is a story of making a plan when you have nothing but a tin of beans and some curry powder. It is the story of taking a bland Dutch casserole and making it sing with the spices of the East. Next time, we look at the vibe, Ubuntu, and the braai. We will explain why you should never, ever touch another man's fire, and how a single philosophy held a breaking nation together. You don't want to miss it.